It is the week of the start of the NBA regular season. We got a lot to get to this week. First, ESPN drops an NBA preview. The Hornets make their first round of roster cuts after the preseason, and we got to bring out the roster grid. All today on Locked On Hornets. Doesn't matter that we can't hear it.
You are Locked On Hornets, your daily Charlotte Hornets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
In a minute, cuz we live.
It's Locked On Hornets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Thanks for making us your first listen. We are free and available anywhere you get your podcast. That does include YouTube. There's Doug Branson. You can find him on his substack, everyhornetsboxscore.com. I'm Walker Mail. You can listen to me on WFNZ every weekday from 12 to 3 p.m. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the NBA season with a big return on FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. I forgot to mention, make sure you check out Doug's Substack, everyhornetsboxscore.com, but also his subtext. You can text him there as well and share all of your depraved Hornets thoughts. Doug, you got something for the people?
Yes, we got one more thing to announce. We also have a free Locked On Hornets newsletter that debuts today that will have not only a recap of what we talked about in this episode, but it's also going to feature some national writing from Katie Heindel, who's been on this show. She writes for Basketball Feelings. There'll be some X's and O's from, I have it here. Hold on. It's from Shearer. He does basketball poetry on Substack. I'll get it. I didn't want to get his name wrong, so I'll just say his last name. This is a good entertainment trick. You just say, "Oh, Shearer," you know Shearer.
Yeah. Shearer for
so
sure.
I'll have details for you in the second segment. More on this newsletter, but sign up at lockedondaily.com.
Yeah, Doug's going to be helping out with that too. All the behind-the-scenes stuff, basically. That's what Doug is doing for the Locked On Hornets podcast, and we appreciate him for that. I'm Walker Mail. Again, listen to me, WFNZ, every weekday from 12 to 3 p.m. So, game week. I'm ready for it. Season starts. It's the real thing, as we've mentioned a couple times. So the NBA Preview dropped on ESPN, 2024-2025 ESPN Preview. They brought in a bunch of NBA writers. They asked a bunch of questions, and then they ranked each of the NBA teams based on some certain criteria. The Hornets are the 25th team here, Doug. So they are 25th going into 2024-2025. Their BPI is 23rd. We've already talked about that. They have the Hornets' chances to make the playoffs at 33.8%. Not terrible, honestly. I'll take 38%. That's fine with me. And then their projected wins, they set at 37, which also I will take. That seems to be on the high mark compared to other publications out there and what they see the Hornets as in this upcoming season. I want to go with goal talk because there's a lot of interesting questions that are here on this preview, but I want to go to goal talk and I want to go to Chris Herring's quote at the end of that specific excerpt of this article. Chris Herring says, "There aren't immediate expectations to win in place, but the club needs a good enough run of health to make a proper evaluation." Do you feel like that's a good summary of what Hornets fans should want this year? That, okay, maybe this isn't an immediate win now type of ball club going into this year. Of course, we would like the wins. We don't want a culture of losing constantly. But even if we can't immediately win, we would like to have a good run of health in order to properly evaluate what we need going forward. It feels like to me that's a pretty good way to summarize what the Hornets should want as much as anything this year.
I think the Hornets have done a great job not setting expectations too high for a roster that honestly they don't even know if it works. And the reason they don't know that it works is because they haven't seen it feature a lot together because of injuries. This is an evaluation season, which I think particularly helps Charles Lee coming in as a new coach. You know, you're not immediately going to be hit with expectations of, well, you have to make the playoffs right now because we just signed LaMelo Ball to a big contract. That would be a mistake that I think we've seen far too often just down the street at Bank of America Stadium, where expectations did not match the realities of what was going on with the roster or what was happening with the roster. So, yeah, I think it's a good evaluation of where the Hornets are, and honestly, I think it's in a much better place than it was as the team in previous years was, I don't know, getting the team ready to sell, or I don't know why the expectations were weirdly about playoffs when the decision making, when the roster construction did not reflect a team ready to make the playoffs, but it was always, oh, this is a postseason roster. No one said that. Like, you haven't heard that from Jeff Peterson. You haven't heard that from Schlotkin, the ownership group. You haven't heard that from Charles Lee. What you have heard is step one. And step one is about establishing a culture of improvement, daily improvement. Then you can get to wins.
If anything, the coaches and the rhetoric have been leaning more towards, who knows? What we need to do is we need to set ourselves up for the future. That's what it's leaned more towards, and that this is going to be a process and that this is step one. So you're right. I don't know if they've come out and ultimately directly said to the fan base, yeah, we're not going to win this year, because nobody is going to say that unless you're Jakob Poeltl in Toronto, who said the quiet part out loud. Charles Lee, Jeff Peterson, they're not going to say that. But what they are going to say is this is step one. We need to make sure everything is in place for when we're ultimately ready to succeed in the playoffs. And this is something that is very similar to what Mitch Kupchak would preach. We don't want to just get to the playoffs and then get bounced. We want to get to the playoffs and have some stability once we get to the postseason.
And here's why they can get away with that. Here's why they can get away with not having like solid expectations, a solid plan, communicating that to fans. It's because of the injuries, because they need some fair time to evaluate what they have. It's because they have a young roster with guys where it's like, well, I mean, this player could become X, but they also could become Y. And so we don't know, so we got to figure that out. But I think it's also because there have been some clear indications, whether you look at some of the smaller roster moves that Jeff Peterson has made, the trades that they've made and been involved in, and also, I mean, you even go to something like the practice facility that they're investing money in building and putting uptown and trying to put like legitimate resources into this team. I think you can get away with saying, hey, guys, we need some time to evaluate what we have roster-wise before we're ready to, put the gear shifter into like, fifth gear or whatever on a playoff run. Mm-hmm. But you could tell I've driven automatics my entire life. I don't know if that analogy was all
maybe
right.
Maybe overdrive.
Never driven a manual.
I didn't know. Yeah, I didn't know where you were going. But fifth gear is fine.
But they can get away with it because they're actually investing time, attention, and money into the team, whereas previous regimes were not doing that.
Yeah, and I do think that it's probably a little more palatable to hear your new GM and your new coach say that rather than Mitch Kupchak say it in his third go-around as the head decision maker, his fourth
year
go-around.
One, that's a perfect point. You can also get away with that because it's year one of the reset. And now in year two, year three, as LaMelo Ball gets closer and closer to his contract running out, then the expectations has got to be a whole different ball game.
All right, let's move on. Coming up next on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
Bees everywhere!
Let's dissect this preview a little more, plus go through the strengths and the weaknesses of the Hornets ball club. That's still to come on Locked On Hornets. This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. Halloween lets us have fun with what scares us, but what about those fears that don't involve zombies and ghosts? Therapy is a great tool for facing your fears and finding ways to overcome them, because sometimes the scariest thing is not facing our fears in the first place and holding ourselves back. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and then you can switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Overcome your fears with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, H-E-L-P, BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA. More Locked On Hornets ahead. Let's go through some strengths and weaknesses. Then let's get to some roster cuts. The rotation station is what you have there with the fire emoji.
I want to tell you, after we do roster cuts, now we have a clearer indication of what this 14-man roster looks like. So then we can put some final touches on the rotation dock as we get ready for this regular season opener.
All right, here's more analysis from Chris Herring on ESPN, the biggest strengths and weaknesses for this Charlotte team. He said, win or lose, Charlotte figures to get a look at second-year wing Brandon Miller's progression. From February through April last season, he averaged 20 points per game, 5 rebounds, 2.5 assists on 45% shooting from the field, 37% from deep, potentially the makings of a franchise player. Here's some other weaknesses too, right? With the overall numbers to watch, the Hornets finished 28th in offensive efficiency last year. Not good. They struggled to create easy points. They also ranked last in free throw attempt rate and bottom 5 in both offensive rebounding percentage and points per possession in transition. Man, if you're not getting to the free throw line, if you're not even able to create easy buckets through transition because you don't have LaMelo out there, who just, I think LaMelo on any roster makes a basketball team at least a top half transition team. It doesn't matter what you have around him. LaMelo on your team, that's what it feels like. You're at least a top 16 team if you even have a bunch of G Leaguers around you at that point. So LaMelo being healthy would help with that. No free throws, no offensive boards, and that's something like Nick Richards has been decent at, and Mark Williams was elite at it when he was on the court. But of course, he's not healthy too. I hate to keep banging that drum, Doug. We know what it is. Every Hornets fan has heard it not only on this podcast, they've heard it on WFNZ, they've heard it nationally, but just the health will fix a lot of this. It really will. It does not mean that they're going to be a second-round team, but Mark Williams going out there, that helps a lot with offensive rebounding. LaMelo Ball out there, it helps a lot with transition. The free throw rate, now that's something that health doesn't immediately just go ahead and fix. You still got some things you got to work with there. I think Josh Green will help a little. I think LaMelo just overall getting better at that will help. But a lot of this stuff gets much improved because, hey, we have our talent and our players aren't missing 50 games every season.
Yeah, it's I think it's key to note that LaMelo rested for one game in the preseason, and that was the game that I thought they looked clunkiest on offense because it reverted right back to what we saw a lot last season, which was Brandon Miller and Miles Bridges sort of trying to figure it out every offensive possession, and it didn't, like, they weren't getting good looks in the first part of the shot clock. It was always, the ball moving around without much purpose. And so really when we talk about health, I think it is LaMelo's health. He's still going to be the engine of the offense, and particularly of getting out into transition, as you said. It's gonna be key that he stays healthy. And honestly, you have to tack on to that Vasa Micic not playing very well in the preseason. You know what I'm saying? Like if Vasa Micic had grown his game and shown it in preseason, I'd feel a lot better about missing LaMelo Ball for a few games here and there. Obviously if they lose him for half a season or 75% of the season, as has been the case the past couple of years, then it's OVER over. But if they miss him for 5 or 10 games, like I wasn't going to be as worried about that before I saw Vasa Micic just go out there and throw 5 turnovers and then sit down. Like it's not been very good there. So strengths and weaknesses. I think strengths obviously is having LaMelo and Brandon in your backcourt wing, whatever you want to say. Like having those 2 3-point shooters is going to really stress out defenses this season. And then in terms of weaknesses, I mean it's the shooting beyond that, I think, is going to present some spacing challenges. And I would say like rebounding, defense, physicality, like all of those things that were big question marks, have been big question marks for years now, dating back 2 coaches ago in Borrego, those still remain. I think defensively we've seen some good strides, but I'm just not sure that this roster right now is constructed such that you could put an elite defense on the floor that I think Charles Lee is going to seek in years to come.
I don't know if this is one of the teams you hate playing against defensively. I mean, maybe offensively. This can go back to, what was it, a comment from Ish Smith when he was here. Shout out to Ish. When he was with the Wizards, they said, yeah, the Hornets were really tough to play because at that point, the pace was just so crazy. Offensively, they were really tough to stop, and that's when LaMelo was actually just a tiny bit healthy. He had his all-star appearance, right? We know how that went. So that was the way. That might even be a little more so of the way that they're tough to play against. But defensively, I'm not saying they're going to be a pushover. It's just not going to be one of the teams that the opposition is shaking in their boots because, oh, buddy, it's going to be a rough scoring night for us. Yeah, you're probably still going to be able to get your numbers and fairly efficiently.
Well, and here's the problem, and when you talk about weakness and what we might see this season, the problem is that free throw rate that you were talking about. You've got guards and wings that can shoot, But there are serious questions about how much they can derive at the free throw line, how willing they are, how willing they should be, honestly, when you're talking about LaMelo Ball flinging his body all over the place. That makes you a little bit worried. But how many free throws are they going to derive? And that is important because, when you don't have shooting all across the board, there's just going to be nights when LaMelo and Brandon are off, and the offense is going to look terrible because they're not able to get to the free throw line and get easy points, and increase their offensive efficiency. And so if you're not, as a team, staking your identity on the defensive end, and trying hard even when the offense is going poorly, that's going to be the biggest challenge. If they can do that, they'll survive the game. They'll get closer to that 37 win mark. But if this is going to be a team that reverts back to the old ways of we're not defined by our defense and it's going to come and go as our offense comes and goes, then it's going to be another difficult year for the Charlotte Hornets.
And I will say, if all we can do with assistant coaches that take over their first head coaching job is go back to the team in which they were an assistant, if you go to Boston last year, they were 25th in free throw attempts per game. Orlando was number 1 at 24.5. Now Milwaukee was 23.5, but that's kind of like a Giannis stat as much as anything with how many free throws that he gets. But this is the point. This is where, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, studs, all NBA worthy players, MVP conversation players. This is why you go to somebody like Zach Lowe, who kept preaching, I would just like to see their shots at the rim increase a little more, and I'd like to see their free throws increase a little more. They finished 25th. So that goes back to they shoot a lot of threes. And when you're shooting a lot of threes, you're not putting a ton of pressure at the cup on the defense where a lot of the fouls happen. So are we really going to see a big time improvement in free throw rate? I think that's a fair question to ask. Maybe it's one of those, well, it can't get any worse. If they finished literally dead last in free throw rate last year, they can improve. They could go to 29 and improve, right? They can go to 28 and improve. But the kind of improvement we're talking about, to where you get to top 20, top 18, somewhere around there, maybe that doesn't happen because Brandon Miller's shooting a lot more threes. We saw that quite a bit this preseason. We know LaMelo is going to continue to shoot them. So maybe that doesn't improve as much as we wanted here, Doug.
Well, I would be super worried about this had I not seen Miles Bridges get his, quote, bounce back. He looks like he's ready to drive more to the rim, and that athleticism, that mustard that he's got in his game, it's back, okay? So that's good. The other good news is that Trey Mann looks like a completely transformed offensive player. He can get to wherever he wants on the floor, and he's picking good spots to get to on the floor. His shot profile looks great. He can get all the way to the rim if he wants to, but he's been most deadly around the rim. So, I think there are a few things scattered about that have improved enough where I'm saying, okay, there's a chance all of this can work. But if the two guys that are going to hold the basketball most for you, LaMelo Ball and Brandon Miller, if they're not going to generate many free throws, it's going to be difficult for your offense to be efficient. It's not going to be impossible, but it's going to be difficult. You throw onto that Mark Williams being a big that doesn't shoot. Again, it's just kind of all these things that stack on top. I'm excited about the year that they're going to have, honestly, because I think there are going to be a lot of individual improvements that will signal to the team which direction they need to go from here. But there are these kind of little things that stack up and say, all right, I don't. One little thing goes wrong here or there, and the whole kind of thing collapses.
Yeah, the good news is the backcourt can shoot. LaMelo, bona fide. Brandon, bona fide. So that's the good news in all of this. And if they're going to be phenomenal shooters, then, well, yeah, it makes sense. If you're really good at it, then continue to let it fly. We'll see about the free throw rate. That'll be a really interesting question mark, and it's something we've discussed quite a bit, but perhaps a little more interesting than we even gave it credit for. Coming up next on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
Feed everywhere!
We saw the first round of roster cuts after the preseason. We'll get through some of those players that are no longer on the team, and then we'll go to the rotation station. That's all still to come here on Locked On Hornets. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NBA fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. It's America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. And if you're interested in some futures bets, perhaps you can bet on the Hornets here, because when we go to ESPN, their idea is that maybe LaMelo Ball, 3-pointers made per game, him being the leader in the NBA, plus 3,300, odds of 33-1. They say it's a lot of juice for a guy that's already a bona fide shooter. So perhaps you just put some money down on LaMelo Ball and on the Hornets. You got to bet the buzz. FanDuel.com. Again, that's FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. More Locked On Hornets ahead. Okay, Doug, we got our first round of Hornets roster cuts. This happened on Friday, really right after we were done recording. In fact, the article I have pulled up from the announcement by Hornets PR, October 18th, 10:31. So really, as soon as we got off the mic. But here are the guys that are no longer on the team. The Hornets announced on October 18th that they waived guard Charlie Brown, center Harry Giles, and forward Keontae Johnson. Brown appeared in 49 games across 4 NBA seasons with the Hawks, the Thunder, the Mavs, the 76ers, and of course the Knicks, who they got in that trade, Karl Anthony Towns going over to New York in that big trade. And Johnson posted almost 20 points per game last season with the Oklahoma City Blue, the Oklahoma City Thunder's G League affiliate. So Keontae, a fun G League project. This is what's most interesting to me. It's Harry Giles, who is no longer on the team and didn't even make it past the first round of roster cuts. Like an NBA Twitter favorite, everybody loves the idea of what Harry Giles can bring. He was the non-Hornets, non-Celtics connect when Brandon Miller, Grant Williams, Mark Williams all went to celebrate the Celtics championship, there being with Charles Lee. Now, there is the Duke connection with Jason Tatum and Harry Giles, but even still, he was somebody that was kind of interesting. And then what do you know? He is actually a member for the Hornets, just not a member of the Hornets for all that long. What do you make of some of the roster cuts here that we see?
Yeah, none of these are terribly surprising. I mean, they did have Keontae Johnson on a 2-way contract, so that's available now if they want to explore that. One name that we didn't hear was Daquan Jeffries, who, if you remember, was also part of the Knicks trade, and then he fractured his hand, and there's no timetable for return. But he's not listed here, so I don't know if he's on the team, if he's not on the team, when he's going to be back if he's on the team. But that's a name that's floating around there as well. So they have an extra 2-way spot. It seems like they have an extra roster spot, which I've been reading about. Apparently, all of these, every CBA, they give teams new tools to expand their roster. And it's actually like all these 2-way spots and all these different like finaglings that they can do have actually led to the death of the 15th spot on the roster, like the actual guaranteed money roster spot. That the Hornets are not alone in what they're doing here with always leaving that 15th spot open. So that's something interesting as well. I mean, I liked what Charlie Brown gave. I liked Keontae Johnson. I thought he was a physical player, but none of the guys showed me something where I'm like, oh, well, they should definitely have a roster spot. I mean, I wouldn't mind any of those guys coming back and playing for the Swarm, though.
I do wonder if there was a shift in opinion on what Harry Giles could bring this team, and I don't know the order of Harry Giles and Moussa Diabate, but with what Diabate was providing, you start to get slim pickings on the amount of time that you have as a big on this squad, which is what Harry Giles essentially would be doing, right? So you have Mark Williams as your center. You even have Taj Gibson coming in as the vet, Moussa Diabate as the young. Hey, maybe we got something here. He's on a 2-way contract. Nick Richards is already your backup center. Grant Williams is your shooting power forward. It started to, and Tijon, right? I mean, hey, you got the 6th overall pick. There started just to not be as much room as maybe previously thought for Harry, because fans were excited. I mean, excited strong. Fans were interested when Harry Giles was a name that was a part of this roster after they signed him.
They were intrigued by the name Harry Giles. And look, lots of size, but if this team wants to get up and down the floor like they say they want to, that's Moussa Diabate. You got that in a big that can run a little bit. I would not count that as one of Harry Giles' strengths. I didn't see that much in the preseason.
Not anymore. I think injuries probably took that away because he was the athletic freak, the #1 high school prospect for quite some time. Shout out to Winston-Salem, but injuries.
Just doesn't look like that anymore, unfortunately. Yeah. So I think this decision was easy. Moussa Diabate made the decision easy with his play.
Yep.
I'm excited about Diabate. They made the right moves here. These are the right cuts, and we'll see what happens with Daquan Jeffries. But the rotation looks pretty clear to me right now. I don't have many questions. You want to take a look at this thing?
Yeah, I would love to take a look at this thing. It's been a while. My favorite categories, it used to be stuck in Spain for James Nagy, but now he is kind of stuck in New York and stuck in Spain. So I don't know what other categories that we have here. We got Swarm. Yeah, you can explain to the people.
Yeah, so I've got the starters. I still, even though we didn't see a lot of them in preseason, I'm still going to have Josh Green here in the starting position at 2. Because I think they're going to want Trey Mann off the bench, providing everything that Trey Mann's going to provide. Now, I do think Trey Mann has a chance here, and we talked about this a lot, to get more minutes than Josh Green. But I think Josh Green starts to cause chaos if he's healthy. We still got to figure that out. So starters: LaMelo Ball, Josh Green, Brandon Miller, Miles Bridges, Mark Williams. Your reserves for your 10-man rotation here: Vasa Micic. I'm more of a question mark there after this preseason for sure. But I don't know that I saw anything from
Nick Smith Jr.
Yeah. Seth Curry. I mean, who else are you going to put in there for those sort of backup point minutes other than like Trey Mann?
Yeah, the flexibility might be Trey Mann at the top and then Seth Curry in that Trey Mann slot. So you just put Trey in the Vasa slot and then move Seth into the that second part here with the reserves if you're watching on YouTube. I think that would be the way to play with it if you really think, hey, there's something that is going to continue with Micic's struggles.
All right, so Cody Martin, Grant Williams, and Nick Richards round out the reserves. And then in your third string category, your these are guys that, again, are going to get spot minutes here and there. They would be the first to call if there's an injury. They would move into that reserve slot most likely. It's going to be Nick Smith Jr., Seth Curry, Tijan Salon, Moussa Diabate, Taj Gibson. Now, I know people that are just kind of jumping on board. Maybe they didn't watch a lot of preseason, didn't watch a lot of summer league, didn't pay attention to the offseason. They may come in and think, hey, I've seen a lot of highlights of this Tijan Salon guy. Why does Locked On Hornets have him in the uh-oh category and not in the reserves category? What would you say to that, Walker?
Well, it's okay. Grant Williams came in and played really well for the Hornets last year. So if what Tijan is giving you is shooting at the most, and rebounding is big too. So if you think Tijan can give you a lot of rebounding as well, maybe that's his path to more minutes. But really what we saw on full display in the preseason was his shooting. Okay, so you put him in over Grant Williams, because Grant Williams you can probably trust more so to have a higher three-point percentage this year than what Tijan will bring you. I just think Grant is going to know where to be defensively on the floor. He probably won't be as crazy, which can be good, probably mostly bad with Charles Lee saying, hey, we need to bring – Charles Lee talked about this in bringing you down more so than needing to rev you up. It's a good problem to have, but we still are calling it a problem. I just think the Grant Williams placement here is what will keep Tijan from being a part of the reserve category and continue to be in the uh-oh. Yeah, this is why it was tough, man. When Josh Lloyd had me on to preview the season for Locked On Fantasy Basketball, I thought this rotation was really hard to decipher compared to years past. They have some depth, at least guys that are all in the same neighborhood in terms of how you think they can get minutes. Tijan is probably the first guy off of the bench in the uh-oh category, but remember Seth Curry was decent when he played last year before he went down with that injury. This is a tough conversation to have.
Oh, I think, look, if there's an issue with Vasa Micic or Trey Mann, then I think, or Cody Martin, because I think Seth can fill like a 2-3 role. So, like, if there are issues with any of those guys, I think Seth Curry is the call. Nick Smith Jr. Had a rough summer league. Looked like he improved his defense some, but his offense was terrible. Then he got injured heading into preseason, missed a majority of preseason, came back in that final preseason game, and didn't shoot maybe the final 2 preseason games, but didn't shoot the basketball very well again. So, he's got to offer offense if he's going to get minutes. So I'm thinking Seth Curry there. And then, it'll be interesting to see if, because Tijan did look a lot better than advertised, or at least a lot more seasoned than we thought he was going to be. We thought he was going to be a much rawer prospect than he showed in preseason. Maybe they do give him a look over Moussa Diabate. But look, obviously if like Nick or Mark gets hurt, that's going to be Taj Gibson, although that could be Moussa Diabate, if they want to go a little bit smaller. There is some versatility laid in here that we haven't seen so much in years past. A lot of options for Charles Lee. But ultimately, I think both you and I see if this season doesn't trend towards playoffs pretty early on, they're going to hit the brakes at some point and move the franchise subtly and then not so subtly when we get past the trade deadline. They're going to move this thing towards Cooper flag watch. And if that's the case, then it's like an easy call to get Salon in there and get some more minutes for him.
So now anybody watching on YouTube, you have the visual of the spreadsheet rotation station. And if you go to the reserves portion, you see Cody Martin there as the last wing or serving as the 3. Tijan Salon in the uh-oh category is right there at the 3. The Sicko's Wet Dream category that is further down has Tijan Salon at the 3.
Well, that's the wet dream. That's not a lineup that you're most likely going to see. I'm just saying, like, that's a fan favorites all across the board. LaMelo Ball, Brandon Miller, Tijan Salon, Miles Bridges, Mark Williams.
Yeah, so that would be the one where, okay, are we really trying to make Salon a 3? And then you talk about Salon was not as raw a prospect as we anticipated. I think that was true in terms of his shooting and rebounding. I think the dude is still pretty raw in dribbling the basketball. I do not feel comfortable with him being out on the wing and doing anything other than swinging it or maybe 2 dribbles maximum. And that's about it, at least at this point. And then as he gets older, yeah, he just turned 19. Happy belated birthday, Tijan Salon. So he still has a lot of room to grow there. But I would say more so closer to the basket in terms of position. If you want to put him out there in the corner, 3-point land, that will be great. I think that's where Tijan Salon wins this upcoming year. So we'll see.
Yeah, and I'm still working out these lineups. So I've got the ABC lineup, the always be closing. I've got LaMelo Ball, Josh Green, Brandon Miller, Miles Bridges, your 4 starters, plus Grant Williams. We'll see. We'll see what he wants to do there. Does he want to go with Grant and go with the smaller lineup there to close games, or will he give Mark Williams the shot to close games? And if you go with those 5, though, that's a lot of shooting on the floor at the same time.
It is. The interesting thing is these lineups were created before we got to really know who Charles Lee is, and it does seem that Charles Lee values size. He wants to have a big out there. So I don't know if always be closing will include Grant Williams anymore. I think you can probably just put the starters and then maybe copy and paste that, although maybe the difference is Mark Williams goes back in that center slot, but Trey Mann goes in the Josh Green slot with the always be closing. I think that's what would make the most sense given what we've heard from Charles Lee and what we've seen in preseason.
And Trey Mann, I think I put Trey Mann in the Bucket Brigade lineup before this preseason, but he's like leading the Bucket Brigade lineup at this point. Like, it's amazing. And then he's also, in one stop, I've got Trey Mann, Josh Green, Cody Martin, Grant Williams, Mark Williams. That's like your, defensive, all defense lineup for the Charlotte Hornets, and then Sicko's Wet Dream. We just went through that. Yep. So, yeah, a lot of options there for Charles Lee. Going to be interesting as we see what he does here in the regular season. I think for the most part, he's going to try to find a 10-man rotation, but it wouldn't surprise me if there's some experimentation in this first week of games and maybe the first 2 weeks where you see an 11th man jump in there. Maybe it is Tijan, because the Swarm don't really get to swarming for a little bit. So a lot of these guys are going to be hanging around the main team. So I think there's room to experiment, but it will be very, like, Charles Lee's going out to win these first few games. So I'm talking spot minutes for Tijan, spot minutes for Nick Smith Jr. here and there as, he looks to work out his eventual 10-man rotation that if the Hornets do get to some kind of playoff level, would have to shrink down to like a 9-man rotation.
And maybe you get down to 9-man rotation even without going to the postseason. What was it once Steve Clifford got his Thunder help? I think it was an 8-man rotation. It was just all the Thunder players. That's what it was.
I'm desperate. Everyone's injured, and everyone's injured, and I don't trust half the guys that are healthy. That's a long name for a lineup. It doesn't have a cute name like Bucket Brigade, but it is accurate to what the situation was.
Okay, Wednesday night basketball, 8 p.m. tip against the Rockets, just a couple of days from now.
Let's go.
We'll have you covered every step of the way here on Locked On Hornets. Make sure you are making us your first listen every single day. Again, we're free. We're available anywhere you get your pods, and that does include YouTube. Also, subscribe to a whole bunch of stuff. Not only our YouTube channel, not only our podcast channels, we also have a newsletter debuting today. We have everyhornetsboxscore.com. It's quite literally what's in the name. You get to keep up to date on everything that's going on in the Hornets box score. I need you to subscribe to Doug Branson's Subtext. For me, it'd be great if you could subscribe to WFNZ stuff, but that doesn't have to do with anything Locked On Hornets related. Subscribe, do all that stuff, and we'll keep you updated every step of the way right here on Locked On Hornets.